greetings, dear friends, and welcome to this very special edition of Tuesday Night Learning at the Shar. With Hanukkah just a few days away, there's a tradition that an ancient source for this holiday, for the Festival of Lights, actually goes back to the first person, because our tradition is that the creation of humanity took place around the time of Rosh Hashanah. And in those first few months of life, one thing that the first person noticed was that the days got shorter and shorter and shorter as headed into the winter season. And of course that comes with that the first man, that Adam, was worried and said, wait a second, is this world going to disappear? It's getting darker and darker and darker. Is it going to disappear? And then suddenly that all changed. And the days started to become longer and longer and longer again. And that was the source of the Festival of Lights, the celebration that to know that this descent into darkness isn't permanent and that ultimately the world will get lighter and lighter and lighter again. In that spirit, we're hearing in the series of Tuesday Night Learning from a number of the members of our community who have brought so much light and goodness to our community and to the world. And we're blessed this evening to hear from Charles Bronfman. And what we'll hear about and from Charles, I'll simply say that if the measure of a person are the generations that follow them, then Charles is an extraordinary human being, because as I've come to know over the years, not only Charles, but Stephen and Ellen and their families and the grandchildren, there's so much good and caring and thoughtful leadership in this family that has been given from generation to generation. It's my pleasure to welcome you to Tuesday Night Learning at the Shar virtual edition. And it's now as well my pleasure to call upon a dear friend, Stephen Bronfman, to introduce this evening's guest speaker.
Thank you, Rabbi. And it's really great to be here. I'm sitting in a special place and I have a photo. So this is Sam, and he's sitting, he's playing solitaire. There's a famous picture that was done by Karsh. He's sitting in the exact same place that I am, in Sam's office, which is now my office, and in the home where Dad grew up in. So I thought it was quite appropriate just to mention that. Now, excuse me while I put on my glasses. I have a little introduction to do. So Tuesday Night Learning with Charles Bronfman, or in my lucky case, a lifetime of learning from Charles Bronfman. Maybe as a teenager, I felt a little less lucky to have too many learnings from Charles Bronfman. But speaking of family learning, Sam and Sadie were exemplary teachers of Jewish values, instilling the importance of tzedakah in their 4 children, Minda, Phyllis, Edgar, and Charles. Minda was very involved in Young Judea. Phyllis gave her all in setting up the CCA. Edgar was a champion of Hillel's and president of the World Jewish Congress. And Charles, well, being co-chairman of the Seagram Company, Dad turned a very successful business career into a second very successful career in philanthropy. Charles became one of Canada's forefathers in venture philanthropy. What is venture philanthropy, you may ask? Well, let's take the Heritage Minutes for an example. You develop and fund an idea, then bring in financial partners, and then slowly recuse and have the partners take on the lead role financially, thus freeing up your initial capital to work on funding and developing new ideas. A venture ideology, really. A heck of a lot more engaged than a plain old check writing. Dad's philanthropic efforts have focused on Canada with the Heritage Minutes, the McGill Institute for the Study of Canada, and of course, in the Jewish world, most well known for the phenomenon called Birthright, which has sent 750,000 Jews to Israel. Absolutely amazing. This was born out of Charles's overall belief in the importance of Israel-diaspora relations. Along with Birthright, there has been a lifetime of involvement with the family, starting as one of the founding family groups in the creation of the Israel Museum. And of course, a lifetime commitment to our Jewish communities in Montreal, New York, and Palm Beach. Speaking of doing good for so many, there was also the Montreal Expos. Dad's love for the game was his main driver in letting Montrealers and Canadians experience the same, turning a baseball team into nos amours. I think the most important lesson I've learned from a life with Charles is the importance of following your passions. Dad has had so much success in his life and has helped so many because of his huge heart and his passion for tzedakah. A better teacher for me, non-existent. I know you will all enjoy this evening very much. Please welcome one of the true greats, known as Pops in our household, and Charles Bronfman to you all. Dad?
Wow, that's quite an introduction. It's always wonderful to be with Stephen, who has taken on such a great leadership role in Montreal and in Canada in several realms. Also, he's a high spotted man in philanthropy. He's in politics, he's in business, and who knows, he may be successful still in the reincarnation of the Expos. So I'm delighted to be here, and I believe that we have a conversation going on with a good friend and big brain, David Makovsky. Hi, David.
Hi, Charles. Good to be with you. And it's an honor to be with people from the Shar. And I want to thank the rabbi. I want to thank Louis Dobrin, man behind the scenes. And of course, I want to thank the Bronfman family, the members of Shar. I've spoken in person at the Shar a few times, and I hope after COVID, if you'd have me, I'd love to come back and do this in person. I feel there's light at the end of the tunnel with COVID, but we're still in a long tunnel. But I should just begin with somewhat of a disclaimer of really gratitude to the Bronfman family. Because I remember when I was about to start graduate school and I had a big decision to make. Do I go for a clear career? I got into a very nice MBA program. I'm grateful for that. And I got into Middle East Studies, which people say, well, what is that exactly? A graduate program in Boston, and I had to make a decision which way to go. And it was really thanks to the Bronfman family and their generosity that I was able to go the way I wanted to, and was to pursue Middle East Studies. I did journalism for 11 years. I became the editor-in-chief of the Jerusalem Post, diplomatic correspondent of Haaretz. In the last 20 years, I've been at the Washington Institute for Near East Policy, and I worked a stint for the United States Secretary of State on Israeli-Palestinian negotiations, 2014-15. But I really think of that fork in the road, and it was because of the generosity of the family that I was able to do that. And I'm grateful to the entire family, to Edgar, to all the people who made that possible. So I think I need to say that up front. But I want to turn the discussion, Charles, that you're really the man of the hour. This is really about you. I'm the one Canadian on the Zoom call. You know, I'm sure there's the secret handshake of Montrealers. I don't know it. So I will ask you, and you know, reading your autobiography, which I recommend to people to read, Distilled, and I know you have your copy. You know, you spoke about, you know, I didn't know, you said that there were French Canadians in Montreal till your 20s. But in a broad sense, how has Montreal shaped you, and how has Canada shaped you to being who you are?
Thank you for that, David. In the first place, I must go do one up on you, because I was bar mitzvah at the Shar, and Rabbi Shire married Rita and me at Stephen's house, which was my parents' house, which was where I was brought up. So Montreal, you know, you can take the boy out of Montreal, you can't take Montreal out of the boy. I think what I learned being a Canadian, particularly, and being a Montrealer, was that manners, number one, civility, number two, being sort of conservative with a small c, because I usually voted liberal. And my son, of course, is involved in liberal politics. But Canadians don't get overly excited, and they don't get overly distressed, unlike the country in which I live now, where things are either wonderful or awful. And I think I learned that being on an even keel is a pretty darn good thing to be, and to be a little bit, when I say manners, civility. Civility is very important to Canadians. We might dislike each other, but we keep that under wraps.
I certainly agree to that, and I hope to I aspire to that as well. I wish it's not unfortunately been part of American life recently, but I think that's the only way to be. But maybe you moved to New York later in life for business reasons. Was it a difficult decision? I mean, as one of Canada's really favorite sons, as we would say, to make that transition
Well, no,
later in
no,
life.
my late wife and I had decided to leave Montreal for slightly different reasons. She was very fed up with the political situation, and every time you'd sit down with Anglophones, there would be this whole session of how we're being dumped on and so on, and how the Francophones have taken over. And it got very boring after a while. I didn't like that, and we put up with it for almost 20 years. But I also knew that I wanted to go further in the Jewish world, and the capital of the diaspora Jewish world was New York City. And we also had a little company called Seagram, which is in New York City, which, by the way, was a plus and a minus, because I knew I'd have some problems with my brother and his son. That happened in spades, of course. But nonetheless, I'm very happy I made the move because of the Jewish part of the equation.
You were the youngest of your siblings. Stephen mentioned your dad's Sam Bronfman, who was a legendary figure, your wife, Sadie Bronfman, and how this was really the home where Stephen is now, is where you grew up, is your dad's house way back when. In your very candid autobiography, you talk about your siblings, your relationship with your dad. At one point, you've said, I love my dad after he died. But on the other hand, your love for your dad really comes through in the biography. And I know, chatting with you, you said he's one of your great heroes, along with Moses and Winston Churchill. Tell us a little bit more about the man known in Montreal as Mr. Sam. I mean, I think he had like a legendary quick temper, but then apologized to people afterwards. You said he had a gift in business. And I said, I want people to understand, to disentangle that. What was the gift? What made him so special? So first, as a father, your relationship, the complexity of that, and then why he emerged as the largest distiller in the world.
Well, he would have been a success at whatever business he had chosen, because he was an opportunist. He was a visionary. He could see things in the future. I remember, David, one time he was sitting in the study where Stephen just spoke from, and he was reading the paper, and he looked at me and he said, oil is liquid gold. Following that, he bought an oil company. And then Seagram bought an oil company, and they were both tremendously successful. Now, this was before oil became $100 a barrel or $65 a barrel, what have you. He just could see into the future. He also was very good at numbers, even though he had never, I think he graduated high school, but that's about all, never went to college. He just was a grassroots, brilliant human being. And there were several sides to him. He was tougher than nails in business. He had people point guns at him at one point, and just said, too bad. He had pioneered blended whiskey in the United States when the bourbon people tried to keep him out. He was a force to be reckoned with in the business world. In the philanthropic world, he was Canadian Jewish Congress president for, over 20 years. And interestingly enough, for this great entrepreneur and capitalist, the people by his side at the Canadian Jewish Congress were a labor lawyer, an insurance man, and the CEO, who was called executive director in those days, was a lawyer, Saul Hayes, who was a brilliant guy. And he was a different man in philanthropy, because he would have socialists. The late Abe Klein, one of the great poets of Canada, and who ran for the Socialist Party in Montreal in a federal election, wrote his speeches, and he was criticized like mad by his socialist friends. How could you do that? And Dad loved him. So then as a father, he was pretty tough on Edgar. I don't really know his relationship with the girls. He was sweet as pie to me. He protected me.
You were the
And,
youngest.
and I remember he used to play tollies with me. He used to come up when I was going to bed, and he'd play this little piggy went to market, this little bitty, you know, and he was just a very different human being, sweet, kind, and everything else. I was scared as hell of him. We all were, but I just thought the world of him.
Do you think, I mean, from what I understand in the books and looking at it, and I've these other biographies I've been reading, on the human side, he was someone who, like, you know, and you write about it too, about he was on a train, he was in New York all week, he came home for Shabbat, and he was very focused on the communal side of the Montreal Jewish community on weekends. He was kind of always on, but you found that he still had time to be a dad, but that sense of communal responsibility must have left an impression with you.
Well, yeah, there was a lot of pressure on everybody in the family. And the reason I think that I had a lot of problems was my siblings were, in my opinion, much better than I was. My older sister, Minda, was a straight A student. She got gold stars all the time. In those days, they gave out stars. Phyllis was a rebel, but talented as heck. She was a sculptress when she was 13 years old. She was also a tomboy and very, very intelligent. And then Edgar was 2 years older. He was bigger, he was stronger, and he sort of bullied me around a lot. And I remember the only way I could get out of that was saying, "I'll tell mommy and daddy." So I felt like I was the little schnook in the family and that they were all vastly superior. I was wrong, by the way. They weren't so vastly, but they talk about the measure of a man is what's left after him. And I think of my parents. My mother was very, very important because she held the fort. Dad was away most of the week, every week. And she would hold us together and was the one, she was the steady, calm one. And she held us to a pretty good standard. And every one of us succeeded in our own way. Edgar is a businessman and president of the World Jewish Congress. Minda was Young Judea in France. Phyllis became an amazing architect. She supervised the building of the Seagram building, found the architect, Mies van der Rohe, built the CCA, is on the panel of judges for architecture worldwide, and was given the Prix de Rome about 4 years ago for architecture, and is just an amazing, amazing woman. Now at age 93, 4 years older than I am, she is going like gangbusters. She just doesn't stop. And by the way, Phyllis and I share something that no other siblings in Canada share. There's the highest honor in Canada is the Companion of the Order of Canada. Phyllis and I both have it. No other siblings do.
That's really something.
So it's really, when you look at what happened when my parents passed away, their siblings all made it somehow or other.
Oh, that's beautiful. I mean, look, I wanted this to be more about, your life and your inner life. And, but since, you mentioned the siblings, you said it's fair game. Do you find that you found like a place of peace with Edgar gone? It was written in all the newspapers. You write in the autobiography, I knew he loved me and I loved him. I wasn't sure about some of the decisions, but do you feel that you're at a place where you feel like, I could put that behind you, that the differences over DuPont and the company, and I know how hurtful it was at the time when some of these key decisions were made. Do you feel like, made your peace with that, and that, that this brotherly love, which, as you point out, there were ups and downs, but you said, I never doubted that my brother loved me.
When Dad died, we were both at the cemetery together, and just he and I alone. And we looked at the grave and we said, we will never let him down.
That was
And
very
frankly,
powerful.
we
I
never
read
did.
that and I really like circled that. I thought that was a very powerful moment, that cemetery scene in your book.
Well, it was quite something else. I wish we had done better as partners than we did, but that's life. However, in philanthropy, we supported each other all the way, never stopped, even when we had a period of angst between us over the business. And you know, we had a strained relationship and a strange relationship, but you know, in Jewish families, this sort of thing happens.
That happens. Yeah. Before we get to the philanthropy and diaspora Jewish relations and all that, I've got to ask, is something that one of parts of our friendship is a love for baseball. And I won't say how the fact that Washington Nationals today have their roots in obviously the Montreal Expos, which I think you for 22 plus years, you were the owner. And bringing, it took a lot out of you to bring baseball to a city that had a lot of francophones, and to put it on the map. But it also, reading these books about you, it's clear that you took from baseball, it brought you out of your shell, that you were your own person. It wasn't just about Seagram's and your role in Seagram's with your brother, but this was your baby. And you're the one that brought it to Canada, and the pride that I think you deserve to have also when you threw out the first pitch at the World Series in Toronto, albeit after you had been owner in Montreal, but that there was this Canadian appreciation that you introduced the sport to Canada, first time outside the United States. So I'm just, if it was just you and me, I would love to go through every baseball player, Rusty Staub and Maury Wills, and go through that. But for a wider audience, we don't have time for that. Just what you learned from that experience as being an owner of baseball, that this was your own baby, and how it's been with you ever since.
Well, the most important thing in that is I always wanted to do something for my city, my province, and the country. My mother thought that I should do it through membership of the Montreal Symphony Orchestra or the Montreal Museum of Art. That wasn't for me. And I was a jock, and I loved being a jock. I loved baseball, hockey, football, you name it, I loved it. And when it came to the baseball thing, it was the mayor of Montreal that really wanted the baseball team, because he wanted a stadium, because if he had a stadium, he could then have the Olympics, which was really what he wanted. And there were originally 10 of us, he told us, at $1 million each, except it turned out to 6. And one way or the other, I became the major factor in the club. And it was my way of doing something for my city, my province, my country. I thought that it was very important for Canadians to be closer to Americans, that I felt that there was a division going on, and commercially and sociologically, I thought it was much better if we were much closer. And baseball succeeded. Stephen mentioned the Expos were called Nos Amours. And there was a love story. It went on for a while until we didn't make it to the World Series because of Blue Monday. And I don't have to tell this audience what Blue Monday was, unless there are young people, very young people watching, because it went from generation to generation. It was a very tragic day, but it happened. I guess the one thing I regret from that is that we never won the World Series, or never in the World Series. But the other thing it taught me, and actually I learned this when I was at Seagram's, I flourish with a partner. I'm not a loner. If I have a partner, my partner in baseball was John McHale, our president. My partner in Seagram's in Canada was a man named Jack Duffy, who nobody will remember. But I flourish. I have in philanthropy, I have 2, Jeff Solomon, and in New York, 3, Ann Tatson for Canada, and Janet Aviad for Israel. And I bounce things off them all the time. And that's who I am. In golf, David, I can play very well with a partner. And, put me on my own, I'll fail.
I know the feeling. I wrote a book. The second one I just did with Dennis Ross, and doing it with a partner, I find it always makes you do better, because
Yes.
you can bounce ideas, and you can get to a higher understanding of issues, and it's a wonderful experience and a great sense of satisfaction. So I really identify with you and what you said about baseball. And did I hear you say to Stephen, is there a chance that to bring the Expos back to Montreal? Did I hear that right, or maybe I misheard?
Oh, no, you heard it right. He's been working with the Tampa people to share the season, half of the season in Montreal, half the season in Tampa. He and the Tampa people have had many discussions. He's discussed it with Major League Baseball. All this is public knowledge. And he's got a good chance for this to happen. How good a chance, I don't know. Because frankly, David, one of the things that I decided to do was to not interfere with my children's affairs, but be they philanthropic or be they business. So he tells me what he wants me to know when he wants me to know it. That's about it.
Well, first of all, Tampa went all the way to the World Series this year, and also there would be it seems to me, some climate balance here, where the times where it's still cold in Canada in early April, be good if they play in Tampa. There might be times in the summer in Florida where it's super hot. It's good that they'd be in Canada. So there could be advantages of partnership there as well. But let me turn to philanthropy. And Stephen mentioned 750,000 Jewish kids or people of different ages, I think largely college students, but maybe not exclusively so, coming to Israel for the first time. And I have visited close to 150 American campuses to 148, I think, before I'm doing now everything on Zoom, talk about BDS and other issues. And I really see the impact of Birthright. And I just want to know if you can give this audience a sense of how did the idea germinate? And here too, you had some partners, Michael Steinhardt, I think Lynn Schusterman, I don't know, Harold Grinspoon and others. And I'm just wondering how you came up with the idea and how did you run with it?
Well, we'd been in the business of trying to get more people to Israel, more young people to Israel. And we had headquartered in Montreal. We were dealing with the American initials, like the UJA and the CJF and so on. But they didn't, and the streams, of course, the conservatives and the Reform and the Orthodox, but they really didn't want to have more kids go to Israel. They wanted to make money on the trips and then spend that money on their youth programs. We wanted more kids to go, so it was not a good partnership. And we were about to fold it. I was in Israel, and Yossi Balin, who you know well, and who was one of Shimon Peres's boys, as it were. He, at that time, I think was either the finance minister or the deputy foreign minister. Anyway, he was high up in the hierarchy. And he had this idea that all Jewish 17-year-olds should have a voucher for a trip to Israel. And he foisted that on me. And I said, well, Yossi, who's going to pay for it? And he said, the Jewish Agency. And I said, oh. He said, well, they have $400 million a year and it goes down the drain. And I said, well, that may or may not be true, but you and I know that it's politics and it won't happen. So then Michael Steinhardt approached me and said, did you speak to Yossi? I said, yes. And he said, what do you think? I said, well, it's an audacious idea, but it's a scheme to bankrupt the Jewish world. That was the beginning of our negotiation. And a year later, we come up with the magic formula. We hadn't bothered consulting the federations. We hadn't consulted the government of Israel. We consulted ourselves, Jeff Solomon on my side, Yitzhak Greenberg, the famous Rabbi Yitzhak Greenberg on Michael's side. And we have been very, very lucky to hire a CEO whose name was the improbable name of Shimshon Shoshani. Without Shimshon, Birthright would never have succeeded. And his successor, Giddy Mark, is the same. He has lifted Birthright to new heights, as, by the way, has the generosity of the Adelsons. Sheldon and I are on opposite sides politically, but his heart is great, and he is by far the largest funder of Birthright today. So anyway, we started it, and it was purely, as Stephen mentioned, venture philanthropy. We didn't know what the heck we were doing, but somehow or other, we did right. We did a lot of research, a lot of studying, and we hired Brandeis to do real research. And they were what we call honest researchers. They were not going to gild the lily and tell us what we wanted to hear. And we figured that we were using other people's money, like the people you just mentioned and others. And we'd see how it went. And we had no idea. And I remember our first ads in the college campuses, there was a picture of a young little Jewish boy, and he was on a thing, and there is a boil there. And the headline read, sometimes being Jewish is tough. And then there's a picture of some beautiful young women by the seashore, dressed in skimpy bikinis, and sometimes it isn't. And that went out to colleges. I remember my late wife, Andy, saying, that's just terrible. I said, yeah, but it's going to work. So I remember the first trips went, Michael and I financed them. And there were 8,000 spots we had, and we had 12,000 applications. So we knew we had something. And then Brandeis interviewed the young adults on the way back, and after they'd come back to North America, and they couldn't believe what they saw and how the kids felt. And the interesting thing is, David, that 10 years later and longer, the results are still the same. That this feeling of Jewishness lasts for a long, long time. And if our cities don't take advantage of those young adults and their enthusiasm, they're making a big mistake. Today, all the young professionals and young adult organizations are headed by Birthright, without exception. It's amazing. Birthright alums.
Yeah, no, it is remarkable. I see it wherever I go on campuses of people who chose communal careers and Hillels and other things, that how formative Birthright has been for them personally. And it takes kind of an audacious hope to say, hey, we got to mean that every Jewish kid in the world who wants to go to Israel has the right to do so. But it probably comes also out of a recognition of a drift between Israel and the diaspora among a younger generation. And you, who have seen so much, your family came from Eastern Europe, from a very difficult circumstance. But while Judaism was so obvious to you, to your family, you've seen the different generations evolve. And I think it seems to me that anyone who reaches the conclusion we got to bring every kid to Israel is saying, because if we don't, there are real implications. We're not saying it's the only way to connect with Israel, of course, you're not saying that, but with so many unaffiliated people, and I think in Canada is probably a better situation than in the United States, that has maybe been away from Europe longer. I think it shows that if we do nothing, the trajectory is clear. Is that fair? I
think you're absolutely right. Intermarriage in this country, the United States, is it's over 50% now. And mind you, that's not so terrible, because I think 70% of intermarried families are bringing up their children Jewish. So, you know, it's there's a plus and a minus to it. But there's no doubt that, you know, all those people came from the old country, as they call it, and they became North Americans. And now what we have to do is take those North Americans and make them Jews again. And you know, Jewishness is such a difficult thing to define. I look at myself as more of a secular Jew. I'm not. I don't. Rabbi Shire will tell you, you don't see me very often in synagogue. But I love the traditions, and I love the value system, and I love being Jewish. And most of my friends are Jewish. I feel very comfortable around Jews. I find that we can kibitz where I can't kibitz with Goyim as well as I can kibitz with Jews. It's just a feeling. Maybe it's our insecurity makes us secure with each other.
It's a nice way of
And
saying it.
you know, it's just so nice. And Israel, you know, the audience, the people in the audience tonight probably are younger than I am. Everybody's younger than I am today. But I remember the War of Independence. I remember World War II, for instance. I remember the War of Independence very well. I remember saying to myself when I was a kid and just went to McGill University, and that was just at the time that the United Nations had voted for Israel. And I was saying to myself, well, is this good for me or bad for me? Because I'm a Canadian. I love Canada. Canada is my home and so on. What would happen, said I to myself, if Canada and Israel went to war? Which side would I be on? So that caused me quite a debate. And then I realized that Canada and Israel would never go to war. And that was a big help.
That's
So
right.
then I decided that I was a Canadian. I love Canada, and I was a big Canadian nationalist. But at the same time, I was a member of the Jewish people. I was 18 years old when that conclusion came my way. I've lived with it ever since.
And so there's a sense of constancy, and because you know, someone who lived before the state of Israel was founded, you know, the Holocaust and the like, you have a sense of Israel's sense of really historic vulnerability in a way that maybe a lot of young people today don't have, because, you know, I go to a college campus to now, it's hard for me to imagine these are kids who were born after 9/11 even, and let alone the 73 war, the 67 war, the Holocaust. It's history. It's like, of course, all my life there's been in Israel. There's a story that President-elect Biden likes to tell, but I think it's important because it gets to the issue of the existential sense of things. And it's that he was visiting Golda Meir. It was his first trip as a Delaware, a senator from Delaware. His wife and child tragically died in a car crash, and he didn't know if he was going to continue. His first trip abroad is to Israel in '73. He was actually in Egypt. He recalls even seeing preparations for war. He gets to Golda Meir. Golda Meir shows all these maps of how dire things are, and sees that Biden's face like turns white, that he's ashen, like he's from Delaware. He's never heard of all this, and it just, I mean, he heard about Israel because his dad talked to him about it, but when the prime minister tells him, you know, how dire the situation is, he started being fearful for Israel's future. And then finally, she has to calm him down and said, Senator, it's going to be okay. And he said, well, after that briefing, what you just said, how is it going to be okay? And said, he goes, Senator, Golda Meir says, we got a secret weapon. He said, can you tell me what the secret weapon is? She said, the secret weapon, Senator, is we have nowhere else to go. And I think that comes from, I mean, there's nobody even in Israel today, the Prime Minister Netanyahu, nobody had those, you know, new Golda Meir in that way. But if you're of a certain generation, the angst of Israel's vulnerability is very tangible.
Let me tell you a story about that, David.
Please.
I was one of the first civilians to arrive in Jerusalem after the 73 war, the Yom Kippur War. And I remember going into the King David Hotel, the storied King David. There was nobody in the lobby, nobody. There was nobody that I knew of in the hotel. The next day, we had a young woman who was taking us over to the Hebrew University. And she told us her story. And then everybody she would meet, the university was closed, of course, because all the kids were in the army. And everybody she would meet, there would be people, walking up and down. There would be somebody else who was either wounded or had died, a friend of this person. So she spent most of the hour that we were together in tears. I then remember having lunch with Sapir. And Sapir was so tired.
That's a legendary finance minister of Israel.
Right,
Just
sorry.
for our viewers who don't know, that's all.
And he told me that they'd come so close to using the dreaded weapon because they figured that they were going to go down, and they said if they're going down, others are going down with them. And you start shuddering and shaking, and you talk about vulnerability. Holy catfish! And then you and I, many of the people here, probably have been in the Golan Heights and have traveled where this terrible fight, this terrible battle had happened, and the Israeli troops had to go up this hill under fire all the time, and finally captured that hill. These are things that are seared into your mind and into your memory. But what seems to have happened was, until the incursion into Lebanon in 1982, Israel was David, and the Arabs, and I use the word Arabs because that's what they were called then, they were Goliath. Then all of a sudden things changed. And now Israel is Goliath and the Palestinians are David, which of course isn't true,
Right.
But that's the impression.
That's right.
Unfortunate.
No, it's true. And that's the impression. And yet, I think you quote Ari Shavid in your book about how you could be seen as Goliath in one arena, but David in another arena in the region. And yet it's hard to, I don't know if we would believe that in, maybe take till 2020, but now you've got a breakthrough with the Gulf. I just came
now
with
we
the
have to
Emirati
worry.
ambassador now, and there is economic potential is extraordinary.
Yes, but we also have to worry a lot about the Iranian missiles.
Exactly.
Because that attack on the Saudi Arabian oil fields some months ago was very, very serious. And if they're arming Hezbollah and their people in Syria with that kind of missile, that is very dangerous for Israel.
I'll tell you a story that happened to me in Abu Dhabi right before COVID. And I talked to a senior Emirati national security official. And he said, look, David, we don't know what the United States is going to do. Trump had said he might leave the Kurds in Syria. He wants to have fewer troops in the Middle East. And he said to me, he goes, look, we don't know what America's going to do, but we know there's one country in the Middle East that cannot afford to leave because it lives in the Middle East. And we see things in a very aligned way regionally. And that's the state of Israel. And so it's remarkable when the Emirati ambassador says Israel is an opportunity and not a threat. I don't know, in your dad's lifetime or in your earlier years, if you could have imagined a situation that Israel would be called like the Sunni state that speaks Hebrew. It's a new world. And then in a perverse way, I joke that the Ayatollah could get a Nobel Peace Prize because he's brought Israeli and Arabs together in a way that they never could have come together on their own. So it's an extraordinary moment in Jewish history. And but I just look to you as someone who spends so much time in Israel and is so devoted to bridging the gaps between Israel and the diaspora. Is the brain behind the Birthright program that has brought 750,000 people. Are there things, when you hear, Israel and diaspora drifting apart, what excites you, what gives you hope, and what keeps you up at night about this relationship between Israel and the diaspora?
Well, first of all, I, like you, am thrilled about the UAE and Bahrain, and we know that's going to be extended to other countries. When Saudi comes along, we don't know, but they'll eventually hopefully make it too. The thing that I love about Birthright, I must say I had something to do with, and that's the mifgash, the meetings between Israelis and our kids. On every bus, there are 8 Israelis, males and females. 80% of them are from the IDF. And they take off their uniforms, put their guns away, and they travel together as friends. And the important thing is that the myths are dispelled. I remember one time going to a camp where there were 8-year Army people, because they went 4 years of Army training, 4 years of academic training. And they were asked, what do you guys think of diaspora Jews? And they put gold and so on the table. And what do you think they think of you? And they put horns. Well, there aren't any horns. There aren't so much gold. And they start learning that underneath everything, they're really very fond of each other and they have the same values. Whether, yes, we have different social and political systems, but we are what we are, and we're Jews, and we love each other underneath everything. So my view always has been that the two great Jewish societies, North America and Israel, must depend on each other, have interdependence, because otherwise the dreams of our forebears who suffered so greatly so that we could live in the lap of luxury, those dreams will be shattered unless we stay together. If we say, I'm okay, you're okay, I'm okay, we ain't going to be okay. We're going to be, as we say in the language of our forefathers, we'd be off-tsurus.
Right.
Big time.
No, and this is, I think it's so important coming from you, because sometimes people only hear, or, you know, in the Orthodox community, they only hear Orthodox people articulate the love of Israel and the importance of Israel diaspora relations. And it's important that there would be, thousands of Charles Bronfmans, maybe not with your wealth, that's not possible, but, who articulate this sense of peoplehood, because peoplehood could go out of vogue. I mean, you could have 2 people, let's say one was born in Minsk and one was born in Pinsk, and they both spoke Yiddish 3 generations ago. But this one goes to Canada, this one goes to New York, or this one goes to California, this one goes to Israel. And 3 generations later, instead of brothers, you've got distant cousins. And not everyone's in touch with their 3rd cousin. And so there's just these centrifugal forces, even apart from assimilation, which you point to, that are going to bring people apart. That's, and so therefore bringing them together and converging in a mifgash at Birthright, or maybe bringing Israelis to the diaspora, that is sometimes, it seems like Sisyphean, like, it's not an even playing field in a certain way. It's uphill because, you're trying to keep 3rd cousins very close. So I really salute you that have you made this effort. And I just wonder how, if you think sustaining this over the years as the generations grow, or do you say, look, with the internet, with WhatsApp, with Zoom, with FaceTime, the people that want to be close, thanks to technology, they could get closer. So it's not like the next generation is 5th cousins, 4th cousins, whatever, 4th, 5th, 6th cousins, but technology is a way of bringing people closer. I just wonder how you see the trajectory between Israel and the diaspora.
Well,
10
we
years from
started
now.
something new. I'm still young enough at heart to start something new. And I think there's that whole Talmud thing, which I don't really, I'll misrepresent, but you have to start. You're not going to finish the job, because you got to start it.
It says in Pirkei Avot, right?
Yeah,
it's not incumbent upon you to finish the task, but neither are you free to engage in it. And
Okay.
that's one of the great quotes.
So Jeff Solomon and I have started something new, which is now called Enter the the Jewish Alliance, or the Alliance for the Jewish People. And what we're trying to do is to set up a whole new understanding, empathy between Israelis and diaspora Jews. We don't know each other. We don't know each other as human beings. Our relationship was built on myths. There was the myth of Israel, or maybe on falsehoods, I should say. At starting 47, 48, the Israelis were the poor little cousins, and we were the rich Jews in America. So the deal was, you give us the money if you're, this is the Israeli side, give us the money and bugger off, because we're going to do our own thing. And that went on for a long time. Then it started evening out as Israel started getting stronger, and we had a very important thing, I think, of twinning cities. Then Israel became the unbelievable startup nation. And Israel is now a giant. And Israel's GDP is equal probably to Canada's by now. And Israel is a strong, strong member of society. So now we have to have a new relationship as equals.
That's right.
And we have to understand each other. And we have to say, hey, who are you and who am I? And can we get together empathetically to understand each other and to love each other? Can we do that? Well, we're going to try and find out.
No, it's exactly right. In a certain way, it's easy to get people to give money if they say they're the miskenim, they're the poor ones who can't fend for themselves, they're the vulnerable ones, we got to help them. But now when the GDP is more like, I checked the numbers per capita, more like France, Japan, and the like, then it's a different thing. And so the commonality has to be based on other things. But Israel still has problems, social issues. It's got real social needs. It's not like it's become so wealthy, but you're 100% right of a need for a new relationship. Okay, I got 3 minutes here before I'm told I gotta finish up. So this is my last question, Charles. You've known so many Israeli leaders. And I wrote this book with Dennis on leadership called Be Strong and of Good Courage, which I spoke about at Shar. And I have a podcast called Decision Points about leadership. You had a friendship with Shimon Peres that I believe spanned 60 years, but you knew all the leaders. And I guess maybe it's unfair given the limited time we have. But just if you could say, like, who is one of the leaders that you met that has inspired you most over there, that helps keep you going?
Well, it is Shimon. Obviously, Ben Gurion was something else, but Shimon had a lot of influence on me because he also was a visionary. He may have been a hell of an infighter in the war between Rabin and him. By the way, with Rabin, I was on the Peres side when poor Rabin was murdered. I don't like the word assassination in regards to him. He was murdered. I remember seeing on television the aftermath of that, and my late wife and I were at a wedding in Boston. I cried for 48 hours, not 24. For 2 days, I was in tears. Why? I knew something terrible had just happened to the Jewish people. Something awful had just happened. I wasn't quite sure what it was, but I knew it was awful, and by God, it was.
Well, we share something here.
And to try to get back to those days is probably impossible, but I just hope that out of the chaos, which is called the Israel government, one of these days, there will be a government that we can all be proud of.
Yes, we share something here. I was a journalist. I traveled around the world with Yitzhak Rabin. The middle name of my oldest son, I named Yitzhak. You were in the presence of greatness. It was the first time I cried since my mother died at a very young age of 44. So I very much empathize. Look, you've been very generous with your time. And, I think I speak for everyone here, just that we wish that not only your philanthropy, but really your love of the Jewish people and your love of the Israel diaspora bridge, as I would like to call it, that light shines brightly. For many years, they say into the Jewish tradition, ad 120 until 120. In your case, I think I would say ad 240 until 240. It should keep going. And I really believe that that legacy will shine brightly for the generations of Bronfmans to come. And I just want to thank you very much for your time and wish you only good things, and wish our audience a happy Hanukkah. You know, wishing people the light at the end of the tunnel of COVID, and that we maybe all benefit from the life of your extraordinary family that has cared so deeply about the diaspora and the Israeli diaspora relationship. So Charles, I want to thank you very much.
David, it's been wonderful being with you, as it always is. More wonderful in person, but thank you for your time. I'd like to thank Rabbi Shire, and I'd like to thank Louis Dobrin for setting this up, and everybody who is watching. Oh, there's Louis.
There's Louis. So yeah, we share that too. Thank you to Louis for being the maestro behind the scenes. And next time, let's do it in person at the Shah in Montreal. Louis, over to you.
Thank you. That was great. Thank you both. It's so easy to close the evening when the speakers are interesting and fun to listen to. David, you are scary smart, yet so grounded and down to earth. I like the way you moderated this evening.
He was terrific. He was great.
He was great. Charles, as always, you're engaging and speak with remarkable candor. And what a compelling story you have to tell. I find it interesting that Judaism has a very different take than Christianity on wealth. Two quotes from the New Testament say it all. From Matthew chapter 9, verse 24, again, I tell you, it is easier for a camel to go through the eye of the needle than for a rich man to enter the kingdom of God. And from Timothy chapter 6, verse 10, the love of money is the root of all evil.
Yeah.
When one attains wealth in Jewish ethos, it is seen as a blessing, which unquestionably it can be. Abraham was a wealthy man. Jacob, when finally quitting his father-in-law's Laban's household, leaves with bounty, much bounty. Charles' life teaches us the good that may come from great wealth. In 1991, Charles formed with Leslie Wexner of Victoria's Secret, the Mega Group, a loosely formed, organized club of some of the wealthiest and influential business figures whose concerns, first and foremost, were Jewish issues and Jewish identity. The Mega Group went on to inspire a number of philanthropies, initiatives including the Partnership of Excellence in Jewish Education, Birthright Israel, of which we heard so much tonight, and upgrading of National Hillel. These initiatives matter and make a difference. I want to conclude by stating how fortunate we in Montreal have been to have at its helm Mr. Sam, then Charles, and now Stephen. We never would have become the renowned Jewish community we are without the Bronfman family. We are lucky indeed. Thank you so much, Charles. What an incredible family, what an incredible legacy, and how great it's been for we Montrealers. I want to just remind everyone to stay tuned for Tuesday, December 22nd, to hear Kaylin Rovanescu in conversation with Jacques Schur. Good evening, everyone, and thank you for being with us. Good night.
And happy Hanukkah.
Good night, happy Hanukkah to everyone.
Great.
Thank you both.
Good evening.
Good job.
Huh?
Good job.
Yeah, done.